Just a quick introduction to the seminar series. It's focused on the careers, leadership choices, and disappointments, successes, um, conquering trials and tribulations, and so forth. And it's about women in leadership roles, women who are blazing trails in the department and leaving footprints for others to follow. Sharing and exchanging workplace and family life experiences is also part of this seminar series. So the folks who, the women who have participated in this seminar have been extraordinary, but commerce itself is an extraordinary department, so that's not surprising. We've had an astronaut, a scientist, an intellectual property expert, business development expert for entrepreneurs, and yes, apparently a few good men too. Today we are thrilled and honored to have Ms. Izella Dornell, the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Commerce Department. And of course, I will serve as your moderator. I am Shyam Sundar. I'm Senior Science Advisor to the Deputy Secretary of Commerce. So shall we begin?
Let's begin.
Okay. Thank you, Izella, for agreeing to participate in this seminar. It's an honor to have you here this morning. With that said, let me start the discussion about women in the workplace by asking you, what challenges did you encounter as your career advanced?
Wow. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming, taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that we're probably standing between you and lunch, so thank you for making the sacrifice of joining us today. And thank you, Shyam, for serving as the moderator. Challenges. Challenges are only challenges if we allow them to cause us to stumble and fall. I would like to think of them as opportunities for me to grow. And so each challenge that I'll talk about, each of them turn out to be a stepping stone for me in my career growth and development, as well as my personal development. So long time ago, my career started in Houston, Texas, at the NASA Johnson Space Center. And I grew up, must be some Texans in the audience. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. And my mother, being a strong woman of faith, always told me that you can be anything you want to be, always aim high, set, lofty goals for yourself, and you get a good education, and you can go anywhere you want to go. So I felt that that was great advice from my mom. I had excellent teachers in grade school, and I always liked math and science. So those things came, as a natural for me. I went to school in Nashville, Tennessee, majored in math and physics, and then here I am going to my first professional job, and that was in Houston. And I thought, well, everything I'd learned in school, everything my mom had taught me, all of the lessons I learned growing up in the South, certainly these things are going to help me. Well, my mom didn't know how to prepare me for the political side of what to expect when you go into a work environment. So that was my first challenge, because I felt that if I did a great job, it would be recognized, and I would be given the appropriate recognition and all of the other things that go with it. Well, that is not what happened. And so I had to learn how to operate in an environment with, a diverse group of people. And back during that time, during the beginning of the Space Shuttle program, the majority of my counterparts were male, and they were Caucasian males. So I had to learn how to navigate and to become part of the team. And that was the political side that my mom did not really know how to teach me. So that was a challenge, but I learned. I learned through mentors that I had that helped me. And believe it or not, my first mentor was a man. And so that helped me get into the rhythm that I needed to be successful starting out a young single woman in her career. As time progressed, I learned how to navigate, and I decided that, well, I believe I can have it all, so maybe I need to work on this personal side, and I became a wife and ultimately a mom. Well, that presented some personal challenges for me because I wanted to have it all. And so I wanted to try to figure out how I could. And that brought challenges, issues for me, but I learned to survive being a working mom and a wife and ultimately becoming a leader or manager in that environment. So I believe that challenges can become stepping stones for opportunities. I have 3 children, and I always tell them that you are the one that I had when I was about to become a GS9, you're my GS12 baby, and you're my GS14 baby. And with each of those, came some sacrifices that my husband and I decided we wanted to take because, we wanted me to be successful in my career, but we also wanted to provide a good environment and a wholesome home life for our children as well. So challenges or opportunities depends on how you approach those challenges.
Thank you. Clearly, we'll delve into more of some of the topics that Izella just raised. Can you start with sharing with us what advice you would provide young women starting their careers about career choices versus family needs, and how do you balance those?
That is very personal. That is really that person. You have to look at yourself and decide what it is you want to do. I was 22 years old when I started my professional career. For some people, they decide that they really want to put that professional career on hold and pursue the personal side of the other personal fulfillment opportunities like marriage or children or going back to school or whatever that may be. So it's really a personal choice. But what I would share with you is that you have to know yourself. You have to know what your goals and aspirations are professionally as well as personally. And then you have to sort of lay out that roadmap to get you to that desired destination. And I found that each destination in my goal book or my goal map kept me wanting to go further and further. And with that, I had to make some choices about my home life as well as career. So if you're young and not so young, age is not really that relevant, but if you're young in your career and you're struggling with, where do I place my emphasis, I recommend that you start by taking a look at yourself in terms of where you are, where would you like to go, and what will it take to get you to that point. And then only you can determine what risks you're willing to take to get to that desired end state. What are you willing to give up? What sacrifices are you willing to take on or give up to get you to where you want to be? I can't tell you what that is for you. That is a personal choice and a decision that you have to make.
Very good. My natural tendency is to want to dig deeper. I'm going to hold off a little bit till we get to a couple of other questions. So as you talked about the political elements in the workplace, and you talked about this particularly in an environment where there were a lot of men, very few women, probably no other women, in most cases.
Counterparts or my peers or members on my team, if you feel like you have to cry, just try to figure out a way to excuse yourself to go to the restroom because sometimes people take you showing emotions as a weakness, and that could dilute your effectiveness on the team. But, you know, times are different now. You know, this was back earlier in my career, so I don't know. I don't know the last time I've seen anyone cry. As a matter of fact, I saw a guy one day get a little bit emotional in a meeting, and I was thinking, wow, but he shouldn't do that. But it was okay. So I think that over time, you know, we probably all want to cry at some point in time, but we just have to know how to manage our emotions. And I found that that was something that I had to learn to do in the environment when it was, you know, I was the only woman or one of few women.
Of course, we have seen senior political leaders cry recently, but it's okay to cry.
Yes, it is.
So I think this is very interesting in terms of the communication tactics and masking your emotions. Clearly, underlying a lot of this has been, I'm sure, the feeling of being held back. This is not in the script, so this is where I'm going off script here. You know, feeling of being held back, or is this sacrifice really worth it? Or, you know, there's a whole spectrum that you can say, well, I'm going to compromise and then adjust, or no, I'm going to do no compromise or very little compromise, and I'm going to push my career.
Right.
How did you internally deal with those type of challenges?
That was probably one of the greatest challenges that I faced in my career, was how to manage the personal side of my life and the professional side. And I want to put everything in context. We're talking about 25 years or so ago. So, you know, the world has changed a lot in terms of women in the workplace and men taking on non-traditional roles with the family. But back then, I can recall when I had our first child. And, you know, it was okay. I had Courtney, her name is Courtney, and that was fine. And I took, you know, a little time off from work, but I was conscious of how much time I was away. And I went back to work, but I didn't want being a mom to be perceived as a weakness. So we had to, you know, solicit the help of my mom, my mother-in-law, and they didn't live in Texas, but they came and they helped us at home with our baby so that I could, you know, could pursue my career and my husband could pursue his career. But there was one particular day where we had this meeting with the administrator. It was coming to Houston, and I needed to present one of the programs to him. And as it would be, Courtney got sick, and my husband was on travel, and I needed to take her to the pediatrician. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to miss this opportunity to present to the administrator, but I didn't want my peers to say, or my manager to say, you know, that's why we don't want these moms, you know, with you know, key positions, because she should be presenting and now she has to run off to the pediatrician. So I talked to our administrative assistant and I said, you know, I really have a dilemma. I need some help. And so I told her what was going on, and so she said, I tell you what, she said, I'm going to go, and my mom didn't drive, okay, so that was the other problem. So she said, I'll go to your house, and I'll pick up your daughter and get the appointment for you. She said, I know you want to go because I'm sort of hands-on, right? She said, but you go ahead and you do your presentation, and as soon as you're done, come downstairs, I'll have a car waiting, and we'll go to the doctor, get your daughter checked out, and I'll take her back home for you. And she said, you just excuse yourself from the meeting. And that's what I did. I took Courtney to the doctor, got the medicine, everything. She went back home. I came back, and I sat in my seat at the table, and no one around me knew what had happened. I had World War II going on inside emotionally, but I was able to proceed with what my role was in the meeting. So you don't have to do that now. If I need, I don't have kids that need to go to the doctor that's with me now, but I feel like if I did, I could walk in and I could tell my boss in the back of the room, Steve Cooper, Steve, I need to take Courtney to the doctor. I'll be back later on today. And he'll say, okay, Izella, it's okay. But 25, 30 years ago, that was a no-no. So that was, some of the things, Sean, that I had to adjust and deal with a challenge that became an opportunity.
Super. So you alluded a lot to the 25 years ago piece, and obviously each decade the work environment has become different.
Right.
But there are still differences that you probably encounter in today's work environment. Can you kind of share what you face in today's work environment? And I don't mean Steve or Sham or ITLT and those kinds of things in the Commerce CIO's office, but in general, the kind of challenges you face.
I still face challenges. I still feel that as a woman, and I'm not one that is, all into, well, they're doing this to me because I'm a woman, or they're doing this to me because I'm a woman of color. That is always, present, and some people are more receptive than others. So that is really not something that I put a lot of focus on. But when I go into an environment, to meetings or whatever, not only from men, sometimes from other women, I find that you have to sometimes establish why you're there, and the fact that you may have the subject matter expertise for that particular meeting or product that you're working on. And so I don't know if it's, I haven't figured it out yet whether or not it's so much that I'm a woman or I'm a woman of color or what it is, but being in a non-traditional type role, women in technology find sometimes that you're not taken as seriously, or that you may not necessarily have the right stuff and have all of the right tools or knowledge about the technology. So for women who aspire to be in technology, it's really a good practice to make sure that you do stay abreast of the changes, because if you're in technology, things are changing every day. And so you have to make sure that you educate yourself, you keep yourself abreast of what those changes are. And you do that through networking, you do that through courses, seminars, conferences, and things of that nature. But today, I honestly will have to say that my biggest challenge is, since I have the budget responsibility for the CIO shop, I find that that is probably the most stressful, challenging, thing that I'm responsible for, is trying to get my counterparts in the C-suite that's not, IT, specialists, to understand that what we're trying to acquire as a project, a program, that it's important, and that we have done due diligence with the business case analysis. We know best, and sometimes we find that it's a little bit, another way. So that's really a challenge, and I don't think that has anything to do with me being a woman or anything of that nature. That's just how it is, because I've watched other CIOs or deputy CIOs that are male. They are under the same, heat lamp when they are trying to get their budgets approved through the budget process. So it has nothing to do with me being a woman.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Sometimes we tend to look at problems through our own frames of reference. In fact, it might be the same thing everybody else is feeling. So that's a great point. So just as a comment.
And so that would be my advice to you as you grow and navigate on your career journey, is to try to have at least 2 of the 3. And having a sponsor is not bad, because they can sometimes open a door for you that you cannot open yourself.
And I want to kind of build a little bit on that. You've obviously reached the pinnacle of the federal service, the senior executive service, and you said you started as a GS9 or
A 7.
some level, 7. So can you speak to that career progression? Because it's not easy
No, it's not.
to go all the way up to the senior executive service.
No, it's not. From a GS7, I realized when I first came out of college that having a degree in math and physics, and during that era, computers were coming into their own, and so I started as a technical intern at NASA, and they felt that, oh, she has a degree in math, she's going to become a computer programmer. So I started programming in those old languages like Fortran and COBOL. And so my first assignment was to provide the software for onboard for the shuttle for the astronauts to use for their information management system. Well, you know, the contractor really did the work. So I just had to write the requirements, but I had to understand the code in order to write the requirements. Well, I did that for about a year and realized that, this is not what I see myself doing for the rest of my career. And I felt that I needed to have something to sort of round out that technical aspect of my career. So I went back to school and I pursued MBA. And so around that time, that was from the time I was a 7 until about the time I was a GS9. And when I became a GS9, I got my MBA and my MRS on the same day in December. So that morning I graduated with the master's, and around 5 o'clock that day I became a Mrs. So that was a milestone there for me as well. But after getting the GS9 and starting to blend the business with the technical, I realized that I still needed some executive coaching or training, and my mentor recommended that. He said, at some point in time, you're going to want to go, or you should want to go to Harvard for their executive development program. And I was thinking, Harvard, sure, right. And I didn't want to go back to school at that particular point in time. But I did keep it in the back of my mind. I got my 11, that was okay. But I started to know for myself, and again, I was saying you have to look at yourself and know what it is you really want to do. I knew that that was not where I wanted my career to end because, you know, I guess journeyman level was around a 12 or 13, and I knew that that was not the end for me. And so I started to take baby steps. And so I did go to a program for women executives at Simmons College in Boston. And I was with 25 dynamic women, and none of them were from the federal government. So they were all from Fortune 500 companies. And that was very eye-opening for me. And that sort of encouraged me and spurred me on to want to do more because I'm thinking, wow, you know, these are some sharp ladies. And so I did that, and I came back, and at that time you had to compete for the next grade level. And there was a 14th position that was open, and I competed for it and was not selected. And I was crushed because I thought, I've done A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Why didn't I get it? And so my first reaction was to go to the manager that made the decision and just really, you know, tell him, you know, you really made a mistake. But my coach said, you don't do that, Izella. You go and you go and you want to get something from this experience that's going to help you later in your career. So I went and I asked the individual I thanked them for the interview, I thanked them for the opportunity to compete, and I said, you know, I really know that this is not where the road ends for me, so could you please share with me what I may need to do to make me more competitive the next time an opportunity presents itself? Well, that disarmed him, and so he didn't become defensive, and he went on to tell me, he said, Izella, it had nothing to do with whether or not you were the best qualified or not. he said it really boiled down to what was the best fit for the organization in terms of where we were going. Well, I felt a little better because I realized that it wasn't anything else I really needed to do from learning more about the subject matter or the project. It was just that I was not the right fit. And I think that that was very key for me because it helped me to start getting attuned more to the personal side, behaviors and things of that nature as I progressed. And so I did end up eventually getting the 14, and I ended up becoming a GS-15. And I realized that, well, one day I really think I would like to be an SES. And that didn't happen for me at NASA. That happened for me here at the Department of Commerce. And so I came on a detail, and I ended up becoming an SES here, and the rest is sort of history. But I look back on the sum total of all of my experiences from the beginning of my professional journey out of college, and I can sort of see stair steps that were, some of them were personal experiences that I had, some of them were professional experiences that I had, but all of those were stair steps that led me to where I am today. And someone asked me the other day, what defines you? And I said, well, what defines me is really the sum total of all of my life experiences, whether it was personal or professional. And you put all those together, and what you see is what you get, and that's Izella. And I learned along the way also that I could be comfortable being me. So oftentimes we want to emulate someone else, and it's nothing wrong with looking at others and seeing traits in them that you may want to, have as part of you. But at the end of the day, you really have to be yourself. And when you're yourself, I feel that you go further and you do better and you are happier when you are yourself.
That's fantastic. I think that was very illuminating. So one thing you picked up from here is persistence and determination in the face of also what might have been, in some cases, adversity. And that is really essential to getting to these positions, because adversity keeps coming at you all the time. So can you speak, obviously you've had a very interesting career at NASA. And yes, a lot of us probably understand more about the commerce role. Can you speak to some of the exciting things you confronted while you were at NASA? Because you were involved with some of the very important programs that this nation had.
Yes. Coming out of college and going to work for NASA was probably a dream come true, because as a child, I was always interested in sciences. I never wanted to go to the moon, but I think one of the most impactful things in my life was when we were watching this little black and white TV and watching, man set foot on the moon for the first time. And back then, I never dreamed that I would be part of the human spaceflight program. I started at the point in time when the space shuttle was just going through maybe the first 4 or 5 flights, and working in the space shuttle program, you had an opportunity to work with the astronauts, get to know them, and because of the environment, you tend to live near the Space Center. So my neighbors were, members of the astronaut corps. Kathy Sullivan, that is the head of NOAA, was the first woman to walk in space, and I had the opportunity to work with Kathy when she was at NASA. And so just being in that environment, it became sort of part of you. And to go through 2 space shuttle tragedies the Challenger in 1986. Ronald McNair was a personal friend of mine, and that was very devastating. And then to go through it again in 2003 was even, more so. And, but I watched the community bounce back. And I learned a lot going through those adverse times because it builds resilience. You turn to each other for strength, and you keep trying, because I know that that's what those crew members would have wanted us to do, was to keep trying. There were a lot of firsts in space, but all good things do come to an end. So when the space shuttle program was coming to an end, there was a new program on the horizon. President Bush had said, we're going to end the shuttle program. We're going to have this new program, Constellation. And because of some of the things that I was able to do with the space shuttle program, I was asked to join the Constellation team at its infancy here in Washington at NASA headquarters. So I came up to DC, and I worked on the Constellation program to really help define what the requirements would be, working with some people I had not worked with before, but that was very exciting for me because the shuttle program was already in place when I went to work at NASA, but to be on the ground floor of a new program was very exhilarating for me. And at the same time, I was also the Space Shuttle Transition Manager. So the last thing that I did at NASA before coming to Commerce was to make sure that we had everything in place from a program perspective to transition from the Space Shuttle program, the assets, the people, the resources, over to Space Station, and then ultimately to the Constellation program that's now what they call a commercial crew program at NASA. So I've had the opportunity to work the Space Shuttle, which is very exciting, the Constellation program, and then coming to Commerce, I thought was really a great opportunity for me too, as well, because there's some aspects of Commerce that have connections back to what's done at NASA, and that's in particular in the NOAA arena with the satellites. And so that's been very rewarding and exciting for me. And again, in positions and roles that I didn't really see a lot of women, or a lot of women of color, or women in general. So it was very, I felt very rewarding and an excellent opportunity for me.
Thank you. So part of a career is the learning process, and I think what Izella has just shared with us is what keeps it really exciting is you constantly are learning new things.
Right.
So with that in mind, how do you think what would you suggest to encourage young women, girls to seek careers in the STEM fields?
I would not encourage girls to seek the career in the STEM field just to say, girls, go after STEM. I think it has to be something that they're really interested in, because you need the STEM disciplines, but you also need the other disciplines as well. I feel that girls should be given the exposure early on when they are younger to the STEM disciplines, and if the parents or the teachers or whomever can determine from working with the young ladies or the girls that there's an interest there, then I believe that interest should be cultivated to help motivate and move them as they go through grade school and on to college or wherever they go beyond high school, to nurture that desire. But just to say girls should, pursue STEM, I think that is not really what we should do. It should be if they have the interest. But how do they get the interest? We have to provide those opportunities of exposure for them. And so I spend a lot of my time when I'm not here at Commerce working with organizations that work to aspire young ladies to pursue, careers or fields of study that's STEM related. And we have a program here at Commerce also that's looking to do that, and I'm working somewhat with them.
So this is clearly an area of great interest to me, but can you say a little bit more about this? Because yes, we certainly need to encourage people to go after their own aspirations.
Right.
But sometimes there are subtle messages that get communicated, like certain people are not suited to math or to quantitative skills. And particularly this happens probably to girls.
Right.
So can you share with us your insights on how one deals with that, and so that we're really encouraging people to really go after their aspirations, to test out and try out these new areas where they might love it if they're given the right environment to succeed.
Right, and I think that gets back, Sham, to there's a group in Northern Virginia that work with a few of the grade schools there, and my sorority spend some time working with those young ladies. And so what you do is, you don't go, because you're right, some of them like, I don't want to do math, but you find a way to introduce it. It may be through a game, and they enjoy the game that you're going through with them at that time, and you're monitoring how they're responding, and if they're able to finish, if it's a puzzle, a game, or whatever, and then, you start to reinforce, now see, that wasn't really hard at all, and you start to tease out of them those fears. But it takes individuals like us to spend that time to help them, because sometimes, and it's not just girls, they're little boys, young men, they have fears of, STEM, math, science, technology, engineering, they have those fears as well. And I like to, put them together. I don't really like to have the girls here and the boys here. I think if we blend them, they can learn from each other and sort of, diffuse some of the fears or misgivings that they may have about science and math and engineering of that nature.
By the way, your answer is absolutely right, not only for girls, but also for boys, and I can tell you that for sure, having been a professor at one point. So I want to ask one final question before we turn it over to the audience to ask us questions. What would be a dream day off from work where you don't have a BlackBerry, iPhone, or an iPad with you?
Oh, wow.
All of the above.
All of the above. If I could have my dream day, if I could have a day off, I'm trying to think of the last time I had a day off without a BlackBerry or iPad. Let's see. But a dream day off for me would be one where I would start my day looking at my favorite Good Morning America show with a cup of Starbucks coffee, and I would be curled up on the sofa watching that, and around 10 o'clock I would roll out and go to the spa, and I would just, relax there, get all of the, things that you get done at the spa. Probably around noon, I'd meet a friend for lunch, and then off to shopping. And hopefully my husband would have said, just buy whatever you want, and I would be off to the races. And then I would end the day maybe, at happy hour with some smooth jazz, and then I would come in and I'd think, wow, I must have been dreaming. Because I'd pick up that iPad or that Surface Pro or and I'd have 300 messages, but that's what a dream day off for me would be. I'm looking forward to having that one day.
It's within Steve's power to make it happen, I
That's-
think. So, just didn't want to put Steve on the spot there, it's not actually, that was a facetious comment because, most of us are real professionals, all of us here. So, even if we have this dream day, we are going to go back to that BlackBerry or an iPad to start looking at all the things that have, happened over the day. Let's give, I do want to turn, before we get to thanking Izella, I want to turn the conversation over to the audience to ask questions, because I think this has been a very stimulating set of experiences that Izella has shared with us. And it would be wonderful to see what questions you have for Izella. Wherever the mic goes. Keep your
Hi,
hands.
thank you so much for that speech. Laura Kahn, Patent and Trademark Office. As a woman engineer, I relate a lot to what you're saying. They say about 20% of women have aspirations to be technical, sort of CEO sort of positions. Was there ever a time where you felt lonely for having these aspirations, and how did you surround yourself with a support group, maybe outside of work or within work, that would help you feel a little bit less lonely, strange, insert the blank? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Early on, I did feel lonely, and I can think of a time specifically when I came to Commerce. I felt very lonely, and it wasn't that anyone had done anything to cause me to feel lonely, but I did not know the Commerce culture, so I had to learn that. But fortunately, there were a few people that I had to interface with from time to time that I found the opportunity to talk with them and just ask, can you really tell me what I'm missing? Because I found that I felt a little bit detached initially, and one person in particular that's here on the front row was very instrumental in helping me get the roadmap of how to navigate at Commerce, working with the CFO's office and working with the other CIOs. Because when I came, I was asked to establish a governance model for the IT investments. And so I came from an environment where you're given an assignment or you're given a task, you come in and you start, you're leading it, and, the people around you, they sort of, they roll up their sleeves and they help. But I didn't, realize that Commerce consists of, I knew it had 11 bureaus, but I didn't know that every bureau was a nation within itself. And, and so trying to move that forward to get the heads nodding in this direction with the things that we were trying to do with the IT investment process was a little bit painful, but fortunately there were a couple of people that bought into what it is we were trying to do, and we were able to ultimately get there. But it was very painful and lonesome. Many times I wish that I could have just gone back to Houston because I was like, why am I here? But, over time, you have to surround yourself with the right people. And hopefully, and you don't want people that's going to be yes people. You want people that's going to tell you the truth about where you are, what you're doing, to see you, sort of like looking in the mirror, and can help you with things that you may need to adjust as you're trying to accomplish what your goals are. But yes, it can be lonely at times, but never let that be something that stops you. You have to figure out a way to go forward.
Hi, good morning, Izella. Thank you so much for being with us, and Sean, thank you for moderating, and thank you to Karen's team for organizing this session. Izella, thank you for being a honorary Texan, and thank you for, as someone who was a NASA fellow for many years, thank you for paving the way for women like me who had an opportunity to work at NASA and work on the STS-129. I have two questions for you. One, as women, I think that we carry a lot of hats as caregivers, as mothers, as wives, and sometimes we may not take the time we need for ourselves from a personal perspective to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can be of service to folks in the workplace and folks in our personal life. Can you speak to that and the importance of that? And the second question is, what would Izella today tell Izella, the 22-year-old technical intern who started at NASA on her day one?
Wow. Thank you. Let's see. You do. As we all wear different hats, and even my male counterparts wear different hats. I would strongly urge women to make sure that you do the things that we should do to ensure that our health is intact. And take some time off to think about you. Don't think about work. Take some time off to just do you. As my daughter would say, Mom, you just have to do you sometime. I can easily say that, but I don't do that. I don't know of a time that I'm not plugged in. I guess the only time I wasn't plugged in was when we went on a family vacation and we were in Spain the early part of September, and I did not, take my devices with me. But last year in the spring, I had really pushed myself, and I had not gone to the doctor as I should because I was really pushing myself, and Sean can relate. During that time, we were going through a transition in our office, so things were a little rocky. And I remember leaving the office, going to a meeting over in the CFO shop. And at that time, we sat on the 5th floor. So if you're familiar with the building, I think that's the 3rd quarter. I remember going from the office towards the blue carpet, as we would call it then, and that's all I remember. And when I realized what had happened, I didn't know what had happened. I was on the floor, and Mike Anderson, that works in the budget office, was standing over me. And I was trying to figure out, well, why is he over me, and why am I on this floor? And so I ended up going to the health unit, and ultimately I was at the Inova Hospital there in Fairfax. But it was a frightening thing for me because they thought that I had had a heart attack. And, I went through all the tests, and of course I had to go back to Houston because I wanted to go to the DeBakey Heart Institute just to make sure. Not that they don't have good doctors up here, but I wanted to make sure. And so, I found out that I had neglected to recognize some signals that I had gotten along the way. And so taking care of your health is so important. And you have to learn to leave things here sometimes. You can't always take it home with you. You should not take it home with you. You should always sort of walk away, and then if you need to pick it up a little bit later in the evening or at night, if that's your style, do that. But you have to unplug. And so I'm learning to do that. Do I do it often? No, but I'm learning to do that because once you lose your health, you're no good to the people in your personal life as well as your team that you are part of here at work. Izella today would say to Izella, 22-year-old, from the first day arriving in Houston, Texas, it's okay to make mistakes, learn from your mistakes, and to be willing to accept change more readily. That's what I would say to Izella of yesterday.
I want to thank you for taking the time to come here and speak with us. This is my first week here, so it's been exciting to be able to sit down and come to something like that. So I thank you for your time and for sharing and being so candid. My question to you is, when you first started, you spoke about your mother being woman of faith. How important has faith been to you on your journey, both personally and professionally?
Faith is very important to me. It was something that was instilled in me as a child. Faith, we all have something that we believe in. For me, it was very much a part of my DNA. I'm a Southern Baptist preacher's kid, so you can imagine every Sunday I was at church, and that is what keeps me going every day, is the time that I spend, quiet time that I spend reflecting and meditating on what I believe in. And that's what I do at the beginning of my day, all during my day, while I'm sitting here talking to you all. Help me get through this, and my team will tell you that sometime when we're in meetings and having discussions, I'll say, help me. And I don't know if they know when I say that, what I'm really meaning when I say that, but now I even hear some of them saying, help me. And I don't know if they're saying, help me get away from her, but or somebody help me. But on a serious note, faith is very important to me.
Hi, Izella. Just a question. So, you left NASA after many years. You left your home. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the decision process? I don't know if you made a list, pros and cons. Did you develop a tree? But what did you go through actually then to convince you that the pros went out, that yes, I should leave NASA, I should make this move, I'm going to leave my home, go to a new region. I think that's a very, interesting process for one to go through. So can you share a little bit of that with us?
Yes, that was very hard, Terry, to do. But there were some factors that helped me. Of course, I had to have a supportive family. At the time that I came to Commerce on a detail assignment, I had no intentions of staying here. So my family was accustomed to me traveling, because in the Space Shuttle program, every week I was somewhere. But they were accustomed to me coming home on Friday. So that was, me not being there during the week was sort of the norm. But when I came on the detail, I still was thinking, this is nice. I'm getting a different view of the federal government in an environment that I've not really experienced, because, NASA is not a cabinet-level agency. I think at NASA they may have 3 political appointees, and here I don't even know how many hundreds that we have. So it was a different experience, a great learning experience for me. And so at the end of the detail, I was prepared to go back to NASA, to Houston, and the deputy secretary at the time asked me would I be willing to stay, because we had gotten a little momentum going with the reason they had asked me to come. And I said, no, I'm going back to hot Houston, And I guess that wasn't the answer he wanted, and he asked me why. And I told him that, it had been nice, but I felt that I wanted to go back to Houston, because that was where I was probably most comfortable at, NASA. And so he said something to me that I had not ever thought about. And he said, when you became a federal employee, you took an oath, right? And I said, yeah, I did. We all do, right? And he said, yes. He said, well, did you pledge that you were going to serve NASA? Or did you say that you would serve the federal government? And I had to think about it. I said, well, I guess I said the government. And so he said, we need your skills here. And he said, we need your service here. So he said, I want you to think about it. So I went back, and because that was very profound for me, because I never thought about that. And I talked to my husband about it and asked him what did he think. And he said, well, we used to you not being here during the week anyway. So he said, if that's something that you want to try, and if it's going to be good for your career, he said, we'll support it. He said, we'll make it work. And so we were able to make it work. My husband worked for Boeing, and Boeing has a presence here in the DC area, so he worked space station. So he was able to come here and telework, a week or two a month. And I had the agreement with the CIO that I was working for at the time that I would get to go to Houston and telework a week a month. And so it worked out great. And that helped me to make the transition. So a few years later, we still are making it work. Have invested a lot of money with Southwest Airlines and United Airlines, but there's a price you pay for achieving some of your career goals and aspirations. And so if I had to do it all over again, I would. I wanted to make sure that my children did not suffer. So I asked them periodically, do you think you suffered in any way because your mom was on the move? And they'll tell you no, they don't, because I made sure that I was always there for those important moments in their life. And I was always a great volunteer for the bake sale, from the Harry-Tita's equivalent store. I just knew how to put it on my own plate. So if I had to do it all over again, I would. I think it's been a very fulfilling and rewarding experience for me, career-wise as well as personal. And it has really sort of given us personally, and I personalized my husband and my children and I, an opportunity to explore a part of the country where we probably would not have spent a whole lot of time. And so now my two daughters live in New York, and so we spend a lot of time back and forth visiting each other. So I would do the same thing all over again. We just have to figure out how to get my son up this way.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us today. I thought that your comments on encouraging young girls to go after their interest in STEM was really interesting, but I was wondering if you could elaborate more on how to encourage young girls to go after leadership positions. Oftentimes we're called bossy, or we're kind of belittled and not encouraged to take that role. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
I think that you have to help dispel some of the past myths about, girls or females or women when we are assertive, because sometimes you get labeled, and that's something that, I have been conscious of in my career growth and development. But if you think about it, girls are leaders. They have the foundation to be leaders, but everybody is really not, that's not their goal or desire to be a leader. But we're all leaders within our own right in terms of where we are in our personal as well as our professional lives. I think that it's really good to help, when you can, dispel some of those myths about being bossy. No, she's not being bossy. She's just expressing her view. And that does not translate into being bossy. And so, and it's interesting, sometimes in our society, if it's a female, we're being bossy. If it's a guy, he's being, assertive. So why can't I be assertive and it be viewed as being positive? So I think to the extent that we can encourage, working with young little girls or young women, seek to find out where their strengths are or where their interests are, and just try to cultivate it in a positive way. And when you find situations where it gets too bossy or those type things, just try to dispel that and say, it's okay. It's okay for you to speak up, speak out, and be heard.
Other questions there?
Thank you very much for your time. This has been a very enlightening experience.
Thank you.
I very much believe in the power of education, and you touched on your experience with your MBA, and I'm curious as to how significant that played as a role in your career development, and also do you have a desire to continue your education into the PhD role?
The desire for continuous learning, education was something that was instilled in me early on. I guess my mom was probably my greatest inspiration when I look back on my life. I knew that you needed to have a balance to the three-legged stool, and so having the technical was fine, but what I realized was that sometimes having the technical and not being able to communicate from the business acumen side was a void, and so that's why I wanted to pursue getting the MBA. And so after getting that, I was able to still blend the two in my career growth and development, and then along the way, taking advantage of opportunities that were provided for me to go to Harvard. I even did something at Penn State. So just continuous learning, not just on the technical side, but on, the people side, coaching and how to get along well with people, whether they're difficult or not difficult, as well as the business side. And every day I come here, I learn something. So I always find that we're always in a continuous learning, and it's what you do with those opportunities and challenges that present themselves to us every day, all during the day. So always look for what you can do to learn from whatever experience that you encounter. And I think that is really a good foundation and stepping stones to get from where you are today and where you may desire to be tomorrow.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, I do want to kind of stress or reinforce what Izella and the question was asked about leadership, because I think that's building the pipeline of that'll lead to the pool of top leaders is also equally important. And I think when you start looking at trying to fill positions for leadership positions, oftentimes you don't have as many choices.
Right.
So I think taking the steps to actually be the trailblazer like the way Izella has been is really, really important, because that's what builds that pool from which then you can get selected and get those positions. And it's fascinating to watch how the corporate world is changing in the United States. The top leaders in many of the companies, whether it's IBM or Lockheed Martin or GM, they're all women. And so this is really completely taking off in the U.S. and certainly in Europe, where they're going after it in a more regulatory type of way. But I think we are doing it more in a free market way,
Right.
and it's really working well. So I think that's a great way to end this
Yes, thank you.
conversation. And let's give a round of applause to Izella.